Good morning. Happy Monday. I just love it when the news and the scriptures kind of merge together in a wonderful way. Sometimes it seems like they merge together in a threatening way. But in the last couple of weeks, Francis Collins, who is the head of the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, announced that he was going to retire. And he is the only person who's ever served as the head of the NIH to serve more than one administration. He served under Obama and under Trump and now under Biden, but now he is retiring. He is a person of just towering intellect. Before he was with the National Institutes of Health, he was the leader of the group that mapped the entire human genome, and so much we know about human DNA and so many of the treatments and things that have come in the last few years from DNA treatments and whatnot have come from that incredible work that he did and his team did mapping the human genome. If you were in a room with Francis Collins, you know who the smartest one in the room is. It's not you. It's going to be Francis Collins. There are very few rooms where he would not be the smartest one in the room. And yet he is also a wonderful, deep person of faith in Jesus Christ. And he has spent a lot of his career dedicated to, as he says, at helping people explore God's Word and God's world to draw them closer to God. And he wants to show that science and faith actually go hand in hand, and they both amplify the other, and they help us understand God in a better way. And I tell you all of that because one of the passages from this morning comes from the book of Job. Now, Job is a tricky book, and you really shouldn't read Job without 2 or 3 or whatever, several very good commentaries to try to help you understand it, because there's a good bit of heresy in Job, intentionally in there. Job's friends often are speaking heresy. Some of Job's friends' heresy is half-truth, and so we have to kind of parse out through all of that, and it's oftentimes hard to tell who is speaking in there. In the 26th chapter, it's not clear at all whether it's Job's friend or whether it's Job, or many scholars tend to believe, and I do as well, that the narrator kind of takes a step back and says, okay, we've been hearing all this other, now I get to speak for a minute, and he's almost setting us up for the end of the book of Job, when God answers Job's questions by essentially overwhelming Job with all of God's glory. And so I'm going to assume this is the narrator speaking in the 26th chapter, beginning with the 5th verse. But before we go there, we need to recognize that what the speaker is doing is showing us a picture of the universe as the ancients understood it. And we understand that it's different, but this was the way they understood it, and so this is written so that they might understand it. And so here, I want you to look and look at this image of ancient Jewish cosmology. And you see there that Earth is essentially floating in this sea, and it's just floating along in the water, and there are waters all the way around the Earth. So you see the waters below, and which is the great deep, and the waters above and above the firmament, and that's why when you look up and you see blue sky, they thought, well, obviously that's the water up there above the sky. And the water served a dual purpose. It, of course, could, through these great big doors, and you can see maybe some of the doors there in the firmament. Actually, in this picture, I don't know. Well, yeah, there are a few of the doors there. You see the window and doors of heaven. That would let the water down, and it could rain on the earth. But the dome of the sky also protects us from God's glory. God is above all of that, and we would be just incinerated if we were in God's glory. And so that is a protection, dome that protects the earth. Of course, within that dome, they thought the sun and the moon and the stars and the clouds, they are all there in that dome, and everything that we experience is within that dome. And then down below the earth is Sheol, sometimes called hell, of course, or Abaddon is called in Job at one point. And this is this shadowy place that the dead went to. And in the Old Testament, Sheol is not really a place of punishment. It's just this shadowy place where the dead spirits go to await the coming resurrection. And so let me now begin with Job 26, the 5th verse, and we'll kind of walk our ways through it. So it begins, the shades, and that is just the people who are already dead, who have already died. The shades below tremble, the waters and their inhabitants. Sheol is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. And what this means, quite simply, is that even Sheol is not a place beyond the reach of God. You can tell God is over all of that. And so even if you are dead, you are not beyond the reach of God. He, God, stretches out Zaphon over the void and hangs the earth upon nothing. And that sounds weird. Zaphon is simply a word for north. And so it's almost like if you're looking north, I really see almost like you're looking up and you realize we are just hanging in space, just hanging in this void. And this is reminding us, of course, that God did this. And God not only hung the earth, but God hangs the whole universe, whether we're looking at the universe from the way that the ancient Hebrews saw it or the way that we see it. God does that. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not torn open by them. And so there we get this idea that the waters are all up there above the clouds, and they actually are protecting us. He covers the face of the moon and spreads it over his cloud. And we've all seen the clouds go across the face of the moon. This is their understanding was the clouds were right there with the moon. They literally were coming across the moon. He has described a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. And imagine being at the beach and looking out at the horizon and seeing the horizon light up, and it almost circles around you. And so they saw this circle of light on the horizon, on those waters that the earth is floating on. That's what that is talking about. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. And you can see the pillars of heaven there, both on the left and the right, and they really would have gone all the way around. That's what's holding all of that stuff up. And yet God is so powerful that even the pillars of heaven tremble in God's presence. By his power, he stilled the sea. By his understanding, he struck down Rahab. And of course, the sea for the ancients was seen as chaos. It was terrifying to be out on the sea. John F. Kennedy had on his desk, of course, "Oh God, be with me because the sea is so great and my boat is so small." Well, they understood that intimately, but God is one who can still the sea. And you hear Rahab, and you may think of the prostitute that the Hebrew spies rescued from Jericho, but this is actually not that Rahab. This may refer to Egypt, or it may simply refer to a sea monster, but either way, God is more powerful than the governments of earth or of the sea monsters. And it continues, by his wind the heavens were made fair, his hand pierced the fleeing serpent. And the Babylonian god believed that their gods were these great serpents. And this is saying that even if there are some Babylonian gods, God is so much more powerful, and they're just a part of creation. And God could just pierce them with his hand, no problem whatsoever. Just flick them away the way we would flick away a fly. And then we come to the critical, beautiful verses. These are indeed but the outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? And we hear that how small a whisper do we hear of him, and we may be thinking about Elijah, where Elijah's in the cave, and there is an earthquake, and there is a tornado, and there's a fire, but God is not in those, but God is in a still small voice. But that's actually not what this is saying. This is saying all of this stuff that Job has just described within our known universe. The pillars of heaven trembling, sea monsters being vanquished by God, God being able to still the seas and hang the earth in the void. All of that is but a whisper compared to the true thunder of God's glory. And I just love that. And I began with Francis Collins. I want to now show you a little clip from his group BioLogos. And this is a group that he founded to try to really bring together faith and science. This is a woman named Deborah Harzma. She is their president, and she is explaining how God's glory is not tame. So let me let you see this. It's just about a minute and a half.
You might get the impression from these gorgeous images that God's glory is merely pretty. And that's not the point I want to make. God's glory is far beyond us. Yes, there is beauty to it, but it's not safe or tame. So let me show you this animation of showing how a star dies. And here we go. This is a star near the end of its life. This is an artist's impression, and it dies in a supernova explosion of incredible power. For a little while, it outshines billions of stars. And then the debris cloud from that explosion slowly expands and moves the material out into the galaxy. We can still see this one expanding today. This particular nebula, the Crab Nebula, underwent that explosion nearly 1,000 years ago. That explosion was really violent. If it happened in a nearby star, that would be bad news for us. We'd be toast, okay? This is not good. So God's glory at times it's beyond us, and it's very powerful and even dangerous. Think of Mount Everest or Death Valley. These are places on earth filled with stark beauty, but they're not safe. And in the book of Job, God claims ownership of the wild things and the dangerous things of this world as his creation. These too show the glory of Christ.
And so on this Monday morning, go out and enjoy the glory of God. Creation isn't the way that it's described in Job. We don't believe, we understand. And for me, creation is billions of years old, and that's okay. God did it, and that's the point of Job. That's the point of Genesis. That's the point of science, that God did all of this, and that as much as we can understand, even in the vast, vast universe that we can understand, still, it is but a whisper compared to the thunder of God's power. And that sets us in perspective, because in Psalm 8, the psalmist David asked, "When I consider all of this, who am I that you would consider me? And yet you do." And so glory this day in the wonder and the awe of creation, but also in the wonder and the awe of that phrase I use every day: God is with us. Amen.